so excited to read this because I've heard such good things about it.
Wait.
This book is so boring. Oh my lord. I think I'm just too cynical for romance. The author did something that I really don't like when authors do. I think this might be one of my favorite reads. There are generally 3 types of books that I refuse to touch with a 10-foot pole. Classics, romance, and fantasy. And I say types of books because I know there's gonna be people out there who are gonna be like, well, classics is technically not a genre. Sure, okay. Actually, I guess 3.5 because in the realm of nonfiction, which I don't even read that much to begin with, I refuse to touch self-help books as well. But we're focusing on fiction in this video. Now, I have emphasized numerous times on this channel that I am a lit fic girl. I love literary fiction. It is my favorite genre, the types of books that I'm the most drawn towards, and the genre of books that I read the most. I love reading about people, places, or things that are as close to reality as my reality as possible. And I've come to realize that might be a pretty closed-minded way of reading literature. I think there's even more that I could get expanding beyond just literary fiction. I'm not going to get into the details and explain individually why these 3 types of books I'm kind of like not privy to. There are different things about each of those types of books / genres that turned me off. But like I said, I kind of want to be more open-minded. Now, I barely read thrillers, I barely read science fiction, but I wouldn't say they're entirely out of my comfort zone. One of my favorite books is a sci-fi book. Prey by Michael Crichton. I'm still thinking about that like 7 years later. Thriller, it's hard for me to find a good one to get into, which is why I barely read them, but once I do get into it, I eat it up. So those books I wouldn't say are necessarily out of my comfort zone. I do just read them less. So the other day, I went through the painstaking effort of walking through the pouring rain to 3 different libraries that were miles apart to gather all the books that I'm going to read for this video. Now, before some of you come at my neck for not choosing to read certain classics for this video, I, like most modern American students, have been forced to read quite a bit of them for English class. And I also didn't choose to read some other ones because I simply couldn't find a free copy of it in the library because I refuse to spend money on books right now since I'm still incredibly unemployed. So with that being said, let's get to the first section of this book, classics. The first book I'm reading for this video is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. In a nutshell, this book is about 2 working-class laborers named George and Lenny in California's vegetable fields, and they are polar opposites of each other. And this book does such a good job of showing you the major difference in them. They are hustlers with manual labor harvesting other people's crops, and they have dreams of owning their own land one day. And this book takes you through them finding a new job and the obstacles, both big and small, that get in the way of them and their dream. And I really enjoyed this book, y'all. I found this small but mighty novel extremely immersive, and I applaud the major contrast between the beautiful poetic imagery compared to the very specific conversational vernacular each character spoke in via the dialogue. Steinbeck definitely has a wide range as a writer, and I found that quite impressive. Now, the themes and the languages can be quite dark. Elephant in the room, there is the use of a very offensive racial slur. There is also some physical violence involved too. I also felt that there was this undertone of dread and foreboding throughout the entire story, like everything was leading up to something really bad happening. It's not suspenseful like a thriller by any means, but the way that Steinbeck sets up the exposition with the conflict between the characters and the situation they're currently in makes you feel like things might not work out in their best interest. I personally am a huge fan of books that provide commentary on the wealth gap and specifically showing how it manifests in the real world and real everyday people. And lastly, books that rely heavily on interpersonal struggles between characters that exposes the human condition. It's one of those books where nothing happens, but everything happens at the same time. What happened to this kind of writing? Now I know why some classics people are so pretentious. The skill that John Steinbeck has to write characters in such an efficient way in which each one of them is so distinct from each other. And it's like I'm really here. It's like I'm watching a movie. This is the book that kind of reads like a movie. Like I could picture this as a movie in my head. I'm so immersed. I also think we desperately need to talk about Curly's wife. Several fascinating things about her. She doesn't have a name. You were never explicitly told what her name is. She's always just referred to as Curly's wife. She's married, right? So people, like some of the characters in the book, might claim that she's very promiscuous, and she does appear that way. She seems very lustful. And the way I think John Steinbeck writes her wardrobe specifically when she's wearing red as a way to convey to readers her deep desire for affection and love. These women during this time period that this book takes place in are heavily oppressed. The fact that she doesn't even have a name and is only ever referred to as somebody's wife is a very intentional choice by Steinbeck. It's one of those characters where at first you think you're made to dislike them. They're not really portrayed as a very likable person. I think at the end of the day, I have a lot of sympathy for her, and after reading this book, you bet your ass that I am definitely going to be reading East of Eden as soon as I possibly can. Of Mice and Men made me a huge fan of the way Steinbeck writes. The next book I read for this video is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. Now, I did not know this book was so divisive. Coming into it, I thought it was almost universally beloved, but after reading the book myself and reading a lot of the reviews, I've come to understand why this book is so divisive. You either find it poignant, beautiful, and soul-touching, or you find it boring, pointless, and meandering. I, unfortunately, am sorry to say that I definitely fall into the latter, which is very surprising because I really thought I'd enjoy this book based off of the title, the fact that it's by Hemingway, and that I really enjoyed the first 10 pages or so of this book. I remember thinking, wow, this is gonna be a hit. And then the actual main chunk of the novel starts, the main premise, what this whole book is about. When the old man, surprise, surprise, goes out to sea, and he is struggling to catch fish, and he spends days at sea just trying to catch this one fish. Now, I usually gauge a book's enjoyability for my own personal enjoyment based off of how much my mind wanders when I read it, and boy, did my mind take several thousand detours while reading this book that had nothing to do with what this book is actually about. Sometimes I was staring at a page for like 5 minutes because I would read a few sentences, zone out, reread those sentences, and rinse and repeat dozens of times throughout the rest of the book. Now, it is not a difficult book to read by any means. There's no complex sentences, no big vocabulary words, it's not overly prosaic or verbose. I just could not concentrate because the story could not hold my attention for an extended period of time. And I think the explanation for that, and also the main reason I suspect I didn't enjoy this that much, is because there was way too much fishing jargon. I get it, it's a book about a guy who goes fishing, so what do you expect? Well, not this much fishing terminology apparently, and the excruciatingly painful detailed descriptions down to the finger movement of this old man's fishing adventure. For example, here's just a few excerpts that really hit the snooze button for me. He heard the stick break and the line begin to rush out over the gunwale of the skiff. In the darkness, he loosened his sheath knife, and taking all the strain of the fish on his left shoulder, he leaned back and cut the line against the wood of the gunwale. Then he cut the other line closest to him, and in the dark made the loose ends of the reserve coils fast. He worked skillfully with one hand and put his foot on the coils to hold them as he drew his knots tight. Now he had 6 reserve coils of line. There were 2 from each bait he had severed, and the 2 from the bait the fish had taken, and they were all connected. I am so fucking bored. This book is so boring. Oh my lord. I'm like seething with annoyance reading it. I have read many positive reviews about this book, trying to get a sense of what I potentially could have been missing. Like, yes, I know this book is an allegory of finding meaning in your life, and there's a certain kind of heartbreak and symbolism in telling this kind of story from an 80-year-old man's perspective. And I understand the major impact this book and Hemingway as a whole had on American literature, and I fully acknowledge all of this and give Ernest his flowers. But oh my god, just because something is deemed historically important does not mean every single person has to inherently enjoy it. While I can acknowledge something is deep, doesn't mean that I still had to enjoy the reading experience personally. I also heard that this is not one of Hemingway's best books, which gives me some hope because I desperately wanted to like this prolific, iconic author, so perhaps I may still try some of his backlist. I feel like this book falls into the same realm as Catcher in the Rye, not in terms of genre or the content, but the fact that you either love it or you hate it. Like, I have 2 friends, literally in the same conversation, where I found out that it was one of my friend's favorite books. My other friend immediately said, worst book ever. And I don't think The Old Man and the Sea is as polarizing to that extent as Catcher in the Rye, because I think you probably will find a lot of people who are more in the middle ground. And also I think the overall attitude towards this book is more positive than The Catcher in the Rye for sure. But I'm just making this conclusion based off of reviews I've read because they were pretty polarizing, I would say. Lots to discuss with this one though. Even though I didn't really like it that much, I definitely see its merits. And I also acknowledge that there obviously are a lot of great things about this book. Oh boy, where to even begin with this next book? Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. There is so much to unpack with this one. I think the premise of this book is pretty widely known at this point, but just to have all my bases covered just in case, Lolita is about a middle-aged Englishman scholar named Mr. Humbert who becomes obsessed with a 12-year-old girl named Dolores Hayes, and she is the iconic Lolita, the nickname he gives her. And fun fact, I actually learned from Wikipedia that this is because Lolita is the Spanish diminutive for Dolores. That is a very watered-down summary of what this book is about. There is so much more that goes on in here, lots of twists and turns and highs and lows. This book is like a fucking roller coaster. So I'm well aware of how controversial this book has been in the past. Like, it was at one point considered a quote-unquote erotic novel, but I feel like in contemporary times, most people have become extremely aware of its satirical nature of providing commentary on society's pedophiles, though of course, not in a humorous way, but instead many layers of subtext and irony. So immediately off the bat, let's just get this out there. This guy sucks. The main protagonist sucks. But second of all, I really gotta say, Vladimir Nabokov is one hell of a writer. Jesus Christ. I could see why this book is so popular and so critically acclaimed. Like Of Mice and Men, I was immediately immersed in this world. Nabokov's prose is so beautiful, even if the subject matter is absolutely horrendous and you want to punch Humbert in the throat.
Referred now to an essay, a 1992 essay by the British novelist Martin Amis. He compares the prose style in Lolita with a muscle-bound man. A man whose body is bulked up purely for aesthetic reasons, for only the purpose of looking a certain way. That the bodybuilder is not that person who's going to go out and use their muscles to do some job. It is simply there to be looked at, to be oiled up and presented and displayed.
I apparently have the vocabulary of a newborn child because I'm looking up like 3 words every page. And typically in this situation, I would absolutely accuse the author of being overly pretentious and using a thesaurus to write their entire book. However, this is Vladimir Nabokov. I think he is just that good of a writer, and I'm just that dumb. It is simultaneously a challenging read, but also incredibly readable. Like, I felt as though the prose is a mixture of these two, you know? For a good portion of the book, I was able to fly through the sentences, and it kind of felt like what I could only describe as buttery. And I think this is the type of writing that I really like. One that's beautiful and poetic, but also pretty literal and to the point. But also at the same time, on the other hand, I won't lie, some of these sentences can be quite convoluted, and there's a lot of random French phrases and words thrown in the middle of sentences without being translated, because Mr. Humbert is a professor of French.
Et moi qui te fais mon génie. Souvenir, que me veux-tu?
You'll see me in these time lapses consulting my laptop every 2 seconds because I had to look up so many goddamn words. I made a list of every word I didn't know, and it was 184 words long. So much of this book will get under your skin, like some unpleasant sensation seething beneath your eyelids and forearms because of how absolutely despicable the protagonist is and his really disturbing thoughts about young girls. And the interesting thing that I found very thought-provoking was that this man, this protagonist, Mr. Humbert, seems to be fully aware that he is in the wrong, that his desires are morally deplorable, and I think honestly that kind of makes it worse. I felt proud of myself. I had stolen the honey of a spasm without impairing the morals of a minor. Absolutely no harm done. And then, the elation with which the vision of new delights filled me was not horrible but pathetic. I qualify it as pathetic. Pathetic because despite the insatiable fire of my venereal appetite, I intended with the most fervent force and foresight to protect the purity of that 12-year-old child. So clearly he shows motivations and desires to not really quote-unquote corrupt this 12-year-old girl because he knows that whatever he does to her is going to be wrong.
Humbert in fact does have a moral vocabulary and tells us how terrible the things he's doing are.
Okay, do you think that Humbert really believes that his actions are terrible? Do you believe him when he says, "Oh, I was so ashamed, I was so awful"? Do you believe him?
No.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Next up, I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that a story about pedophilia and child sexual abuse is written from the perspective of the middle-aged man perpetrator and not from the 12-year-old perspective of Dolores, the girl who was actually impacted. There is this Iranian writer, Azar Nafisi, who writes, "Lolita was given to us as Humbert's creature. To reinvent her, Humbert must take from Lolita her own real history and replace it with his own. Yet she does have a past. Despite Humbert's attempts to orphan Lolita by robbing her of her history, that past is still given to us in glimpses." And I think this was the intention of writing Lolita from the perspective of Humbert, or more generally, the perspective of the actual pedophile, to make a point that these pedophiles go at great lengths to erase the past and the humanity of their victims.
Do we ever escape from the subjectivity of Humbert? Is there any way to access the subjectivity of Lolita herself?
And in order to elaborate more on this idea of dehumanizing a victim of child sexual abuse, you know me, I love my Reddit posts. This user corroborates this idea by saying, "However beautifully Humbert might express his longing for Lolita, there's always in those descriptions a kind of elision of Lolita herself. Conversely, where he does describe her as a person, where he touches on her preferences or her ideas, there is almost always some disgust about it." This leads me to my next point, and what I'm about to say will will be extremely controversial, but it is a point that I came across that I found endlessly fascinating, so I'm just gonna put it out into the ether. So there's a writer and literary critic named Lionel Trilling, and in 1958 he stated, "We find ourselves the more shocked when we realize that, in the course of reading the novel, we have come virtually to condone the violation it presents. We have been seduced into conniving in the violation, because we have permitted our fantasies to accept what we know to be revolting." Now look, before you go after Lionel Trilling and say, oh my god, he's telling on himself, call the police, drill time for him, I honestly think this is probably one of the reasons why this book is so enthralling, because like a lot of great pieces of storytelling out there, when you're hearing the story from the perspective of some really despicable person, it is more common than not, / very often happens where the viewer or the reader will come to a point and think, oh my god, why am I rooting for this person? Like in Day of the Jackal, why am I rooting for this assassin? And you want to know what? This is not the first time I read this take. In another subreddit post, this person says that Humbert will trick you into accidentally empathizing with him, and you will throw the book across the room in disgust. But, and this is brilliantly put, you will come crawling back to it like a Stockholm Syndrome crack addict, craving some more of that sweet, sweet prose.
So your suggestion is that what's so disturbing about this is that we actually like this guy. We actually come to like Humbert. Would you like to sit down to dinner with Humbert? And I would say this knowing that all of us are outside the nymphette age range. Given that, who would like to sit down with Humbert and why?
I felt as though there was an attempt to depict Humbert as living inside of a fairy tale. He is under a spell, so none of this is actually real, or at least his perceptions of things is not real. Here's an excerpt from Thought Co. in an article about what exactly inspired Nabokov to write Lolita. The novel's unreliable narrator, Humbert, also sees himself as part of a fairy tale. He is on an enchanted island after all, and he's under a nymphette's spell. Before him is an intangible island of entranced time. It was discovered that Nabokov told one of his friends, Edmund Wilson, in April of 1947 that he originally intended to name the novel The Kingdom by the Sea. And the fact that he originally had The Kingdom by the Sea as a title in mind kind of just shows the mindset that Nabokov was in terms of trying to show that this protagonist is on some La La Land, man. He's on Jupiter. And there's also specific examples of words or sentences or phrases that Nabokov sneaks into the text that correlates to a fantasy or a fairy tale, like lost slipper and the sentence gagged, bursting beast and the beauty of her dimpled body in its innocent cotton frock. I'm definitely going to look into reading other Nabokov works because I am a huge fan of his writing. And honestly, I think this might be one of my favorite reads so far. Okay, well that was one hell of a reading experience. I need to cleanse my brain after that. So with that being said, what better way to cleanse one's mind than with a holiday-themed romance novel? Now look, is it the end of March? Are we nowhere near the holiday season? Yeah, but do I give a shit? No. And should you? No. All right, let's get started. In The Holiday Trap by Roan Parrish, one of our main characters named Greta has a strong desire to flee her hometown in Maine because of something terrible her family did to her. And our other protagonist, Truman, also has the same desire to flee his hometown in Louisiana because of something terrible his boyfriend has done to him. But neither of them can actually act on their impulse to get the hell out because Greta has a bajillion plants that need to be taken care of and Truman has a dog. So their mutual friend Ramona has the brilliant idea that they swap houses and take care of one another's living organisms. Basically, Truman will go from the big city of New Orleans to a small town in Maine, and Greta from Maine to New Orleans. And of course, they both manage to, you guessed it, fall in love in their respective new temporary towns. And this is one of my biggest critiques of this book. This felt to me more of like a coming-of-age story than a romance. Parrish gets all the exciting plot and drama out of the way within the first 20 pages, and kind of leaves nothing for the rest of the 400 pages. Like Greta and her love interest Carrie's, yes, that's her real name, fall in love and get physical very fast. There's absolutely no yearning there. What do you mean we're not even 80 pages in and a mutual attraction has already been established and acted upon? Why are they having sex barely 100 pages into this 430 page book? So for Greta's storyline, I just completely stopped caring about her halfway through the book because her storyline is essentially just her having a fun time, planting flowers and beekeeping and hanging out with friends and having sex with Carries in New Orleans. There is no obstacle for Greta to overcome. Yeah, she has her family problems, which is the underlying motivation for her throughout the entire book, and she has to grapple with wanting to move to New Orleans but being too scared to disappoint her family and make them mad, but this is very much in the background. When you're following her day-to-day storyline, I just got bored because it was essentially just a day in the life of a New Orleans transplant, and I did not care. I like Truman's storyline a little better. It was much more of a slow burn and took its time. As a matter of fact, I wish this whole book was actually just Truman's storyline, not gonna lie. He was way more endearing. There was an actual problem to be solved of coming up with business ideas to save Ash's flower shop. I mean, I still got bored of him as well, probably 3/4 of the way through his storyline. Like, there came a point where I was just like, I'm only reading a story about how to revive a dying floral business. Also, to elaborate on this more, I actually just came across this really good Goodreads review by this one user, Tiff, who explains how the sapphic relationship between Carrie's and Greta is not as nearly as fleshed out as Ash and Truman's, and in a lot of queer romances, the sapphic relationship is not given nearly as much time and attention and care and depth as a gay romance. There's also this ridiculous conflict that happens between Greta and Carrie's, in which Carrie's gets disproportionately mad, like super mad at Greta for cleaning up their house after they have a party. And she's mad because she told her not to. And she really goes in on her, saying, "You disrespected me. I told you not to do this, and yet you didn't listen." And she starts to weaponize therapy speak. And I know I'm not alone in thinking that Carrie's is actually the asshole in this situation, because there are a lot of other people on Goodreads who also thought she was just straight up mean. She did zero self-reflection as to how she contributed to this conflict. She never once showed any self-awareness and the fact that, oh, maybe I should have communicated better to you why you should not have cleaned up the house. It's one of those situations where you're like, are you really just setting boundaries to respect yourself, or are you just being an asshole? Given the wild way the book initially starts, I was sad to have my mind absolutely blown. Truly, I was wondering, well, what's in store for us? But honestly, not that much apparently. So what a misleading title this book has. Why is it called The Holiday Trap? Nothing about the storyline is a trap. No one was tricked. Greta and Truman both volunteered for this. I genuinely don't understand the title. Alright, let's look at some of the positives, because I don't always like being a full-time hater. Parrish really gave it her all when it came to coming up with the characters' background stories and their motivations. And there's a lot of minor niche pieces of information or topics or hobbies that are unique to each character, which I always appreciate. Like, Greta's girlfriend gives ghost tours in New Orleans, and one of their friends, Veronica, is a beekeeper and knows a lot about the production of honey. Also, queer representation. Almost every character in this book, both main and side characters, are queer, so that's cool at least. But all in all, this book is less of a rom-com romance and more of a coming-of-age story about a girl finding herself and healing from her toxic family in a big new city, and some guy helping his situationship grow a flower business. Oh my god, I'm finally done. Also, it just occurred to me randomly within the last like maybe 15 pages of reading that I've been mispronouncing Karis's name this whole time. It just dawned on me. I was looking at it and I was like, is it Caris or Karis? Karis makes more sense. Oh my god! The author did something I really don't like. The author did something that I really don't like when authors do. And it's when authors take these very complex political ideologies, water them down, and then very flippantly insert them, like a puzzle piece that doesn't fit, into a line of dialogue for a character to just blurt out randomly just for the posturing. And at that point, it feels like not the character talking, but the author themselves inserting their own personal views just to let the readers know, hey, these are my personal views, I'm the good guy, and then peace the fuck out. For example, alright, context for the quote I'm about to read. Truman, the protagonist, and Ash, the love interest, are currently brainstorming ideas of how to revive Ash's floral business. It's a brainstorming session. It's very casual, free-flowing, nothing too serious. And in this particular part that I'm about to read, they're discussing how to come up with money to pay for stickers that they could print out for Ash's floral shop. Fucking stickers. This is a real line of dialogue from the book. Well, I'm still holding out hope for the toppling of the white supremacist capitalist heteropatriarchy, but in the meantime, I meant something slightly lower key. Do you know someone with a printer? Oh my fucking god. What? Okay, look, don't get it twisted. I agree with this, okay? Me too. It's not the ideology itself that I have any problems with. It's the deliberate choice to insert this ideology in a seemingly very haphazard, flippant way. Because guess what? This idea, the toppling of the white supremacist capitalist heteropatriarchy, never once again referenced or acknowledged throughout the rest of the conversation. I mean, it probably won't be further explored at all throughout the rest of the book. At this point, this is not Truman talking, all right? This line of dialogue is not Truman. It's Roan Parrish. It is the author. I don't believe Truman would say something like this. It doesn't fall in line with his character to say something like this, and so it completely took me out. Oh my god, don't get me twisted again. Literature is political. I'm a strong believer that exploring these topics in books is very important. However, there's a time and a place for it, and there's a way to do it, and this is not how you do it. You don't just take a bunch of buzzwords that you probably learned from like fucking Twitter or Tumblr or like some Instagram infographic and just randomly insert them in not even a line of dialogue just to make your character seem educated. I'm in the middle of a spice scene, and I could not care less. What? We when you put really spicy scene, like for example, Ash, eyelids heavy with lust, did not stop. He swirled his fingertips over Truman's prostate with such perfect pressure that Truman felt his muscles beginning to tense. A light stroke over the head of his cock, and he was gone. That's just a little taste, right, of some of the spicy scenes in here. What is this book cover? Why are you marketing this book as if it's like some happy-go-lucky, kid-friendly rom-com book? Okay, I'm just reading just one small line in a spicy scene that goes on for many pages, and I'm just like, I feel like an 11-year-old could pick this up, you know? And there's no way for them to know what's in here. Also, Greta and what's her face? I don't even remember her name. Carrie's hooked up in a cemetery? I'm just like, girl, that feels a little bit disrespectful. Guys, I am so fucking excited for this next book. I am finally reading Funny Story by Emily Henry. I'm so excited to read this because I've heard such good things about it. It's a lot of people's favorite book, a lot of people's favorite Emily Henry book specifically as well. I am in such a mood right now to get lost in a really good romance with some drama or yearning because we know sure as hell the last book I read did not give me that. Oh no, not a positive review from Colleen Hoover. Ugh. That's fine. We got there's no one else on here that's really that promising, to be quite honest with you. In a nutshell, this book is about Daphne, who is a librarian, and she ends up in a fake dating scenario with her roommate Miles because Daphne's ex-fiance Peter cheated on her and dumped her for his childhood best friend Petra. And you want to know who Petra was? Miles' ex-girlfriend, who is now, if you remember, Daphne's current roommate. And that's how they ended up living together. They're both bonding over the fact that their significant others left them for each other. Messy situation. And this book wastes no time to suck you right into the middle of the mess. You don't really need to know much about the plot, to be quite honest with you, because I think the real draw of this book is the characters. How likable the characters are, and how much the chemistry just jumps off the page. Okay, wait. Bros be like, I know a place, and it's a bar called the Meat Locker. Emily Henry is a phenomenal writer. She draws you into the world immediately, and she's able to balance cheeky banter and humor without being overly cheesy. I've watched some interviews with her, and I love her mindset around the process of writing and crafting characters.
In real life, like, it's pretty rare for someone to just be like a protagonist or a villain. We're all mostly just like doing our best and trying to like get through life. And so I really like taking those characters who could easily be shunted off to the side and making them like the center of the story.
I think literally within the past 2 to 3 out of the 4 videos I posted right before this one, I'm like foaming at my mouth expressing how much I love books that explore the sibling dynamic, and this book did that so exquisitely. I also love the portrayal of female friendships in books. Good friendships among both men and women are rarely properly explored in novels, so I'm so glad we got a really good taste of that. Oh no. Don't get mad at me, don't get mad at me, please don't get mad at me. I can't really do spice scenes. And like, that's where a lot of romances lose me. Should I seek therapy? Is this a problem where I have issues of like reading or seeing anything that deals with physical affection? What is this? Okay, I feel like this next thing I'm about to say is gonna be the most controversial thing in this entire video, so please bear with me. Let me explain my perspective. So one thing about Miles that really reminded me why I'm not typically drawn towards a romance is the fact that he always knew the right thing to say, and that came across as very unrealistic and weird to me. Let me explain. BookFox has this brilliant video on 9 characteristics in male characters that scream a woman wrote this. This came up on my recommended, which is how I found BookFox in the first place, and immediately I was like, okay, this might have some misogynistic undertones, but then I watched the video and everything was on point. One of the biggest and most relevant characteristics he points out is number 2 on the list.
The second mistake when writing men is giving them a genius level emotional IQ. So listen, not every good man out there has a super high emotional IQ. Guys say stuff that tends to be misinterpreted. If your male character always says the right sensitive things at exactly the right sensitive time, then you are not writing a man, you are writing an idealized projection of a man. You're basically writing a mannequin for female readers to get off on. Yeah. I know there is an emotional spectrum out there, and there's a lot of guys who are extremely emotionally tuned. But I think that women have the tendency to write men as all having this emotional IQ equivalent to like Einstein's actual IQ.
There are so many conversations in this book in which he displays this genius level of emotional intelligence. Are you telling me a millennial, white, cisgendered, straight dude in Michigan with this much family baggage and who was just dumped by his girlfriend of 3 years, who immediately got engaged to someone else, was able to achieve all of these extremely self-aware revelations and say all these right things to Daphne with no therapy? I feel like if you were to give a character this level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, it could not have just happened in a vacuum. You need to contextualize where they drew all these conclusions from in the first place. And look, I understand this is a fundamental characteristic trait of the romance genre. It's fiction, it's escapism. BookFox even states in his video.
Now, if you're writing romance, you probably want to commit some of the mistakes I'm mentioning in this video because you're not trying to deliver a real human being to the reader. You're trying to deliver a fantasy.
We both acknowledge this. So I'm not asking Emily Henry to change. I'm not asking for a different kind of story or for the romance genre to change. If I take this book for what it is so much fun. And I am conflicted here because I do really love Miles. So all these problems that I have with the genre can stay, and people can still enjoy these without shame. But I'm explaining how this is the reason why I'm personally not compatible with the romance genre. Even the third act conflict, when Miles does manage to fuck up a little bit, is still resolved a little too quickly. He bounces back from it so fast. And I was like, wait, we didn't really have time to marinate in this actually. And here's the thing, don't get me wrong. I know Miles is by no means a flawless character because I do like the exploration of how he does mistrust himself. He believes that he will let other people down due to the way that his parents have treated him. That's complicated, that's deep, that creates a three-dimensional character, I guess. But the way it was manifested just didn't feel like it got in the way too much. Okay, here we go with Miles just saying and doing all the right things again. I think I'm just too cynical for romance. I just can't really believe it. And look, overall, despite my criticisms, despite the fact that I still don't really like the romance genre because it does feel like I'm reading a caricature and an idealized version of people, especially the love interest, I still think this book was very fun. And I totally understand the hype around Emily Henry and this book specifically. He nuzzles into my throat, lets his hand graze down my chest, rolling against me until I can barely breathe. This just might be my lack of reading comprehension, because when she says rolling against me until I could barely breathe, I'm assuming that means his body, Miles, and not his hand. Like he's like the sentence right before this is lets his hand graze down my chest, rolling against me until I could barely breathe. So is it his hands that's rolling against her? In that case, I don't know what that means. Or is it his body rolling against her? I don't know if anyone else feels this way or I'm just fucking dumb. I'm explaining all of this and I'm fully aware how stupid I come across. Like, this is kind of embarrassing. It's just like, just read the words. Just read. That's all you have to do. Just read, Stephanie. Oh my god, I can't do this. Oh, I can't do this. Does no one else find sex scenes cringy? This is a big reason why I don't really read romance. I just... Okay, question. Has anyone ever gotten goosebumps on your back? Is that a thing? Nope. I typed in, can I get goosebumps on my back? And it's just articles about when to seek medical help when you have goosebumps. Are there any doctors out there? Dermatologists? Or I don't know what field this might be. Can you get goosebumps on your back? Now I'm looking at Cora. Oh, sometimes I feel afraid. Okay, someone on Cora saved the day. Sometimes I feel afraid, then I develop goosebumps on my back. What could be the causes? Okay, this person did not elaborate. Like literally on your back, I've never gotten goosebumps on my back. But like, it's weird, right? It's a very uncommon place to get goosebumps. Or am I the weird one? Wait, okay, this other sentence doesn't make sense. He slides one hand around my waist to nestle between... Oh, no, I get it now. Never mind. Wait, no, okay, hold on. No, actually, no, this doesn't make sense. He slides one hand around my waist to nestle between my thighs. His fingertips score into my hip. So, okay, this might be a left and right hand situation, but in my mind, I'm thinking if your hands are between your thighs, then they can't be on your hip. Like, they can't be between someone's thighs and on the person's hip at the same time. So is it like left hand is between her thighs and then right hand is on her hip? Or he removed his hands and now his fingertips are on the hip? It's just so cringy. What is this about me? I think I need to see a therapist. This is not specific to this book, but every time I reach a little spice scene, especially when they start dirty talking, I'm just like, don't. Why is it cringy to me? Why is it cringy to read this stuff? Hi. Did I just finish Funny Story? Actually, no. Did I just secretly finish another novel in between The Holiday Trap and Funny Story? Yes. And was that yet another Vladimir Nabokov novel, Pale Fire? It sure was. I also realized I was mispronouncing his name throughout majority of my entire Lolita section, so apologies. But that's not what this video is about. I just started reading that because after finishing Lolita, I was like, I need more of Vladimir Nabokov's prose injected into my veins right now. And I read it, and oh my god, I'm not gonna talk about that in this video. I did not plan to read this book for this video. I did not plan to read this book, period, ever. So I'm not gonna dive into Pale Fire. It is dense, it is cumbersome, but it is one of the most unique novels I have ever read.
Is what's left when you remove all the words that are solely connected to the Zemblin narrative.
And it's not in this vlog because that wasn't the plan. What was in the plan though was to read what's this title? Daughter of the Moon Goddess. Who is the author? Oh my god. By Su Lin Tan. Beautiful cover, first of all. I think the last time I read a fantasy, like genuinely got sucked into a fantasy, was Harry Potter when I was a child, before J.K. Rowling was a transphobic asshole. So this is what I believe to be high fantasy because it takes place in this celestial world, that being the heavens above us, where everyone is immortal. It is heavily inspired by Chinese mythology. There are different kingdoms and palaces and all these enchanted places that you could travel back and forth to on a cloud. So, as the title suggests, there is this moon goddess, and this book is about her daughter, Xi Ying. So Xi Ying and her mother live in a palace up in the skies. Something happens in the beginning of this book, this big reveal, something that Xi Ying didn't know about her whole life regarding her mother. And this big piece of news forces Xi Ying to flee her home to safety. I know she's at home, but in order to be safe, she has to actually go into hiding. That's the setup of the rest of the book, and the whole premise is just following Xi Ying throughout several years after her fleeing her home, figuring out how to save and get back to her mom. And throughout the whole course of this journey, she goes on some really wild adventures, serving as someone's servant, training alongside the prince of the entire celestial kingdom, becoming a soldier, fighting some really intense battles, falling in love, being in a subtle love triangle. And there are several not necessarily plot twists that happen throughout the book, but major reveals about the nature of a character's past that changes the relationship that Xi Ying has to this person. Now, of course, as you can tell, this book is jam-packed. It's 498 pages, and so much happens in these 498 pages, which for me, I personally like. For the most part, we'll get to the ending in a little bit, but for the most part, I liked it because I don't really read fantasy. It's not something I'm drawn towards. So I think a storyline in which things are constantly happening at a fast pace is a really good way to keep readers like me, who don't really like fantasy that much, pretty engaged into the text. I've read some people's reviews and they said they got bored in the beginning, and I was like, how? Now let's talk about the writing. This writing is so beautiful. Some people may hate it. Again, I was reading the reviews and a common critique was how on the nose the writing could be, to the point where, and I actually agree with this, it could be considered YA fantasy and not adult fantasy. Like, there's very little subtext and there's a lot of telling and not showing, and there's not a lot of mystery left for the readers to figure out themselves, which, if you know me, you would think I would actually hate that. In a general context, I would hate that. However, from my personal perspective, I actually ended up really liking this writing style in this high fantasy context that's based off of Chinese mythology, because it felt like it shared a lot of actual characteristics to actual Chinese fairy tales and mythologies and fables that exist in our culture. I'm reading Su Lin Tan's prose, and I was reminded heavily about all the fantasy stories that would be featured in a Chinese textbook of mine from my childhood. It looks like this. If you know, you know. Sorry, I should have put a trigger warning, because that is like actually trauma-inducing. It felt like this book was essentially just an extended version of that. Like, it felt like an actual piece of like oral history that would be passed down generation to generation. I also loved, well, I don't love this stuff, but I'm very appreciative of the fact that the book explored themes of the brutality of war and the futility of it, and also the moral ambiguity behind the people involved. There are several parts focusing on Xi Ying's internal guilt from slaying all these creatures and people, and she has to essentially convince herself like it's okay in order to just cope with the fact of all these heinous acts she's committing. Total change in topic, there is a very slow burn friends to lover situation going on here. I thought it was really well done. I liked how it wasn't rushed and the relationship wasn't based off of lust or any like traditional tropes. It was just two people who fit together like a puzzle piece, and they actually grow to genuinely care for the other person. And there's also a love triangle. Some people may not like that, which I didn't know was a thing. Like, I didn't know people didn't really like love triangles until I read this book and I was looking up like reviews on it and such. I thought it was fine. It wasn't the central storyline or like the central romance by any means. I felt like it was plot B or C at best. And also, no spoilers, but I mean, something does happen later on in the book that kind of turns the whole love triangle on its head. If you're curious, you gotta read the book. The world building is absolutely phenomenal. I don't know how this was actually not the first thing that I brought up. The world building is so masterfully done because it's not like exposition heavy. It never feels like Su Lin Tan is just word vomiting paragraphs of information to you for the sake of just setting up the rest of the book. The world building is very intricately interwoven, I felt like, naturally into the plotline. And as someone who doesn't really care for action or extensive descriptions of fantasy worlds, I think I enjoy this as much as I could have. Now, unfortunately, we had to get to a con eventually, and this is a deeply personal thing. I think this book, like many books that are over 400 pages, ends up dragging quite a bit in the third act. I admit, I start to lose major steam by then. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad. It's not like the writing suddenly turned bad. It's not a testament to the quality of writing of the story. And some people actually may be like, what the fuck are you talking about? So much stuff happened, which is still true. There's still a lot of action going on in the third act. But it really is just a personal taste where for me, after a while, as someone who isn't really that interested in action scenes to begin with, once we get to something that's like over 400 pages, by the home stretch of it, I will just naturally start to lose interest in all the action. And in addition to that, all the palaces and the magical and mythological things happening. Call me unimaginative or boring or smooth-brained, I really don't care. That's just how my brain works. But in addition to this, I also felt like there was a lot of unnecessary plot points and details that could have been easily cut, like several conversations that take place or interpersonal confrontations. By the end, I was like, this story is done. This story is done. Why are there still 25 pages left? What is there left to say? I was like really mad, to be quite honest with you. However, would I still recommend this book? Yes, especially to fantasy/high fantasy lovers. Even I, a non-fantasy girly, was having such a fun time with this. Hello! We finally made it to the last book of this video. I will be reading Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Here's the thing, I did start just a little teeny tiny bit of this yesterday and I'm really liking it so far. Cozy feels like the wrong word because I know shit's about to go down. The whole premise that was set up was like, not necessarily intense, but like there are stakes involved, right? And it feels like, you know, emotions are involved as well. So when I say cozy, I don't mean to be dismissive of all these big things that are about to happen. I mean it as in, right now, Rebecca Ross's writing style, the world that she has crafted and the world building that I'm currently going through right now feels cozy. Like the physical atmosphere that they're in feels cozy. For example, back in the quiet of her chamber, Iris opened the window and listened to the rain. The air was cold, brisk. A trace of winter lingered within it, but Iris welcomed its bite and how it made her skin pebble. It reminded her that she was alive. She ate her sandwich and eggs, eventually changing out of her wet clothes for a nightgown. And then she pulls out her grandmother's old typewriter that she hides under her bed. Oh my god. Do you see what I mean by cozy? I love a book where I'm reading it and then I get attached to not only the characters but also the setting. Thank you so much. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross is about a girl named Iris who is a writer at a local newspaper. Her older brother volunteered for the war 5 months ago, and it's a war between these two gods, Dacre and Enva. I think that's how you pronounce his name? I'm not sure. And Iris has a little coworker rival named Roman Kit. Now, Iris, in an attempt to get a hold of her brother, whom she hasn't seen for months and doesn't know if he's alive, writes letters to him on her little typewriter and never receives a response. However, someone has been receiving these letters and eventually responds, and a story unfolds of the relationship between these two people. In addition to the war between the immortal gods, there is also a tiny little aspect of magic here and there that reminds the readers that we're in a fantastical world, like magical typewriters and houses that magically know when you're upset so it makes tea for you. But for the most part, this book seems to be more heavily on the historical fiction and romance side. And of course, in a fantasy book where war and fighting is involved, there is heavy allegory to the nuances and destruction of war. Okay, holy Holy shit. We have a lot to talk about. There's much that needs to be discussed. I need to say this right now because I feel like this is important context to provide to you guys so you understand where I'm coming from when I started this book. I knew jack shit about this novel. I didn't know it was considered / marketed as a rivals to lever fantasy. No idea it was considered a romantasy. I found this book simply just by Googling fantasy books you must read, and it was on one of the lists. I had no idea how beloved this book was. So I went into this with zero expectations. I went in head empty. Have I been living under a rock? Yes, apparently. I watched the Book Leo's video when she was reading a bunch of romantasy books from Book Talk. Apparently she and a lot of people were expecting a hee ha ha cheeky banter rivals to lovers story, and a lot of people were really taken aback by like the really melancholic, depressing, sad themes and events of this book, like the exploration of grief and death and loss. But if you know me, I love that shit. I love sad stuff. Being for real here, I think the reason why I enjoy this book so much and like why I enjoy the explorations of these themes is because it is so deeply human. I saw this YouTube shorts, don't judge me, it just showed up when I searched something else, but I saw this video that someone made about divine rivals, and they were saying how this book is not really a romantasy, it's not really fantasy. Yes, there are fantastical elements to it, like monsters and such, but to her, she said it reads more of like a World War I historical fiction. And a lot of people in the comments agreed. Now, I will say, I love Rebecca Ross's writing style. If this is how she writes a specific subgenre, I want more of it. I actually went ahead on Goodreads yesterday and added a shit ton of her books to my to-be-read list. I personally absolutely loved the development of romance between Iris and Roman. I know the letter writing has been done quite a few times and romances before, but it's definitely not something you see that often, so I enjoyed relishing in this unique love origin story. Look, I know I talked some shit about the romance genre earlier, and they're by no means magically gone in this book. As Frank Fiction beautifully states in her review,
Roman is essentially depicted as the perfect guy. He's handsome, dashing, wealthy, brave. He's always there, willing to save Iris from any situation.
And not to bring up Book Fox once again, but I will bring him up once again, and this is another one of the characteristics that he believes screams a woman wrote this male character.
It is a problem when every single male hero ends up being laser focused on their female partner as if no other women exist in the world. And sometimes it doesn't seem like they even have a personality trait other than obsession.
Do not tell me that this is not Roman Kit to the T. And this is also corroborated by the Unresolved Textual Tensions podcast.
Again, female authors, when you make the character only about their love for the other character, it weakens them as a character and as a person and makes them less likable.
However, I'm not gonna lie to y'all. Did I still eat this romance up like the hypocrite I am? Yes. Was I able to look past them in this case because of the unique nature in which this love story develops? Yeah, because my god, the letters are so fucking beautiful. Just ignore everything else. The writing of the letters themselves are exquisite. What they reveal about each character's backgrounds and desires is so beautifully revealed. I really enjoy the process of learning more about Roman and Kit through these letters and how that influences and reflects their feelings about each other. However, one thing I do wish that they had is beautifully summarized by, once again, Frank Fiction.
I think that the book would have been better if there was a greater focus on Iris and Roman's self-reflection rather than the pining for one another, because it would have made their realization that they cared for one another more impactful.
So complicated mixed feelings about the romance, obviously. There are a lot of flaws, but I still had a fun time. And I know this is YA at the end of the day. So like, funny story, if I just take this for what it is, I'm having a blast. I also once again appreciate the commentary on the brutality of war. I like how the horrors of war aren't just depicted only through graphic action scenes, and how soldiers are traumatized, but also how civilians as well are affected, like going into hiding when you hear a siren, needing to board up all your windows and turn off all the lights to conceal your whereabouts as much as possible, and the abruptness of evacuating your home and how tragic it is to drop all your belongings and everything you've ever known within a split-second notice. I also love the exploration of how one's geographic location affects how you view war and changes your relationship to it. Like, at the end of the day, if you grow up not in a war zone, you just won the geographic lottery. And in this book, people in the East, where Iris is from, have the luxury of never really thinking about the war. Like, Iris's boss doesn't even want her to write about it. But 600 kilometers away in the West, where the war is actually happening, people are facing the threat of Dacre and the destruction and siege of their towns at any second. And this reminded me of something Hassan Minaj said on the Dax Shepard podcast like 6 years ago.
There was this beautiful image that I saw that was posted. It was in regards to the migrant crisis of things that are happening, where a lot of people, refugees, were going into Greece and parts of Europe to try to escape. And there was a photo, and a really funny comedian friend of mine named Amar Rahman, who's hilarious, he posted, "You can say whatever you want about these people." And it was these young kids getting off the raft, running to land. You can call them whatever you want. You can call them filthy, vermin, a disease. But just know this, the only difference between them and you is luck. It made me look at that blue passport in a whole new way. Man, I lucked out having this.
Okay, unfortunately, we do have to get to the cons, and I feel like my next point will be pretty controversial, but bear with me. Look, I love the letter writing as a way for the characters to get to know each other, but am I the only one who felt kind of icky that the whole time Roman knew exactly who was writing him letters while Iris was completely left in the dark? It just feels yucky. This one person is just harboring all this traumatizing, sensitive information about someone without the other person's consent. Like, why are you farming all this deep trauma about your coworker rival? And it just kind of felt imbalanced. I really can't be alone in this. Like, in my perfect world, and I acknowledge this will probably result in a completely different book, but I wish both parties didn't know who they were both writing to, and just let the mystery simmer there, and then they just figure it out over time. Also, I kind of touched upon how this book is kind of mostly historical fiction, and the fantasy kind of falls to the wayside. That kind of means the world building is not the best. All the fantastical elements are pretty sporadic and seem to exist in a vacuum. But also, look, with all these cons that I just laid out, I get it's YA at the end of the day. That's the market. So some of the things that I am looking for in a book, I probably should just find elsewhere. And I should just take this book for what it is if I had an emotional roller coaster of a time, which I kind of did. In conclusion, are classics actually better? Not necessarily. It all just depends on what you're personally looking for when reading a book. And I found true merit and enjoyment in every single types of these books that I read in this video. Now, will I admit that reading classics was slightly more rewarding? Yes. However, I don't think that makes it more valuable or worthwhile to read if you simply aren't interested. And will I be picking up more classics, romance, and fantasy as a result of this video? Absolutely. I already have 2 more Nabokov books on my list, already secretly read another one in the middle of this video, definitely going to read more Steinbeck, excited to get sucked into a romance when I want to turn my brain off and kick my feet and scream, and I've also added more of Rebecca Ross's and Sue Lin Tan's books to my TBR. So if you're watching this right now, it's a sign to try some books out of your comfort zone.